Los Angeles has become a flashpoint for pro-Palestinian protests, drawing thousands to the streets and straining city resources. While most demonstrations are peaceful, clashes with police and disruptions have fueled a sense of crisis. Into this charged atmosphere, former President Donald Trump has made headlines by suggesting he'd consider invoking the Insurrection Act if re-elected. This law would allow him to deploy the U.S. military to quell unrest, an extraordinary step with deep constitutional implications. Trump's remarks tap into fears of chaos, framing protests as threats to law and order rather than expressions of dissent. Local officials now face a dilemma: protect free speech or restore order, all while the possibility of federal intervention looms. The idea of bypassing state authority and sending in troops raises urgent questions about local autonomy and the limits of presidential power. Trump's comments have reignited a national debate. When does protest cross the line into insurrection, and who decides? For many in Los Angeles and beyond, this is no longer a theoretical issue. It's a looming reality. The city's unrest is now a battleground for the future of protest, policing, and presidential authority. As the nation watches, the stakes couldn't be higher. The outcome may redefine the balance between civil liberties and security in America. The Insurrection Act of 1807 gives the president sweeping power to deploy the military on U.S. soil during crises. Normally, the Posse Comitatus Act bars such action, but the Insurrection Act is the exception, intended for moments when civilian authorities lose control. The law's language is broad, letting the president act even without a state's consent if federal laws or citizens' rights are threatened. Historically, it's been used sparingly. Eisenhower enforced desegregation in Little Rock, and Bush sent troops to LA in 1992 at the governor's request. Today's debate is different, centered on using the act against political protests, not riots or rebellion. Critics warn this could let a president unilaterally label dissent as insurrection, weaponizing the military against political opponents. What was meant as a last resort for true emergencies now risks becoming a tool for political control. The stakes, the balance of power, the right to protest, and the future of American democracy. The Insurrection Act's legacy hangs in the balance. The summer of 2020 saw nationwide protests after George Floyd's murder, with unrest and calls for justice filling the streets. President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, vowing to send the military into cities where governors failed to restore order. Top military leaders pushed back, warning that using troops against Americans would be a dangerous escalation. The standoff peaked when federal officers forcibly cleared Lafayette Square for a presidential photo op, an act many saw as a rehearsal for military intervention. Though the act wasn't formally invoked, the episode revealed how close the nation came to seeing soldiers deployed against protesters. The experience left a lasting mark, raising fears about politicizing the military and chilling public dissent. Trump's recent comments show the idea remains on the table, not as a warning, but as a real option for the future. The events of 2020 are no longer just history, they're a blueprint for what could come next. The debate over protest, power, and the military's role is far from settled. Supporters of using the Insurrection Act argue it's a necessary tool to restore order when local leaders can't or won't act. They see military intervention as a last resort to protect communities from chaos, not to silence dissent. For them, the president's duty is to ensure safety, even if that means overriding state authority. Critics counter that deploying troops against protesters is a grave threat to democracy, risking abuse of power and eroding civil liberties. They warn that soldiers aren't trained for crowd control, and using them domestically could lead to tragedy and lasting mistrust. The real danger, they say, is turning the military into a political weapon, undermining the Constitution's checks and balances. The debate boils down to a fundamental question. Should the president have the power to decide when protest becomes insurrection? The answer will shape the nation's future. As the next election approaches, the Insurrection Act debate is about more than politics. It's about the soul of American democracy. If Trump returns to office, he may test the limits of presidential power, risking standoffs with states and a chilling effect on protest. The sight of troops on city streets could transform public dissent and civil-military relations for generations. Some lawmakers want to reform or repeal the act, but the outcome depends on public and political will. Ultimately, Americans must decide, where is the line between protest and insurrection, and who draws it? The protests in Los Angeles are just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The choices made now will define the nation's character for years to come.